"Move, sweetheart. You're blocking the camera, and no one wants you in the picture anyway." The wine hit her like a slap. A full-bodied Cabernet Sauvignon. Deep red. Silky and bold. It splashed across Maya Williams's ivory silk gown, crawling downward like blood on snow. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply blinked, slowly, as the sting of alcohol reached her skin, followed by the sting of laughter. Behind the laughter, she heard it, the unmistakable click of camera shutters, paparazzi, influencers, gala guests with iPhones, all too thrilled to capture the moment. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see Sophia Green's smug smile. The blonde model looked delighted, like a girl who just won a game she invented 5 minutes ago. Her hand still gripped the now empty wine glass, her manicured fingers resting lazily against its stem. And then she saw him, Jason Whitmore, her husband, the man she had once believed would protect her from the cruelty of this world. He was standing just a few steps away, watching the entire thing unfold. He had seen Sophia lift the glass. He had seen the red cascade onto Maya's dress. And he did nothing. Not a word. Not a gesture. He simply stood there, his blue eyes cool, his mouth curling into the faintest of smirks, as though he were watching a scene from a play he had already rehearsed. He even adjusted his cufflinks. The room swirled in golden lights, crystal chandeliers glinting above gilded walls. The New York public hall was alive with champagne, whispers, and polished power. Everyone noticed, but no one stepped forward. Not the senators in their tailored suits, not the CEOs exchanging business cards, not even the charity director, who offered Maya a weak, guilty smile from across the ballroom, then turned away. Jason finally spoke, but not to her. "Someone get her cleaned up," he said casually, still not looking at Maya. "She's making the floor look cheap." Then he turned back to Sophia, murmuring something in her ear. Sophia laughed like crystal breaking. Maya stood alone. Her once pristine gown clung to her legs. The scent of wine mixed with her perfumed gardenia and faint sandalwood, something earthy and soft, now overtaken by bitterness. She could hear her mother's voice in her head. "Don't cry in front of them. They don't deserve your tears." So she didn't. She turned, slowly, her spine straight as a blade, and walked away. The crowd parted like water. No one dared to speak. No one dared to stop her. Outside, the night was colder than she expected. The limo driver rushed to open the door, looking down, pretending not to see the stains. As the car pulled away, she didn't speak. She stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker past ghosts of a life she had once believed in. Jason used to hold her hand under these lights, back when they still had laughter and secrets, back when his fingers would trace hers gently and whisper, "You're the smartest person in every room." He used to kiss her wrists before court trials and say, "You carry justice like royalty." Now, she was just spectacle. 7 years. She gave him 7 years of loyalty, patience, and the sacrifice of her legal career. She built his network. She translated his contracts. She smoothed his reputation when he clashed with minority communities over real estate. And when the spotlight came, he handed it to someone younger, whiter, flashier, and threw Maya in the shadows. Inside the limo, her phone buzzed. Texts. Notifications. No doubt the videos were already circulating. The hashtags would come next. Number Wine on the Wife. Number Whitmore Drama. Number Poor Maya. She turned the phone off. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that she'd been expecting this moment. Not the wine, no, that was Sophia's flair for cruelty. But the betrayal, the very public, very performative rejection? Jason had been setting the stage for months. She just hadn't expected it to burn quite so fast. The car curved off Fifth Avenue and headed north, crossing into Yonkers, past the shimmering skyline and into older roads where the buildings were made of stone, not glass. Her father's house waited at the end of a quiet street. She hadn't been there in nearly 2 years, not since the funeral. The driver slowed. Maya stepped out. The Williams home wasn't large, but it was dignified, built in 1939 by her grandfather, one of the first black architects in Westchester. The windows bore iron frames. The door was oak. Her father had always called it a house that doesn't flinch. She walked inside without turning on the lights. Her heels clicked across the wood floors. The scent of leather and old paper still lingered, unchanged. In her father's study, the air was still. Dust floated like memory in the moonlight. She moved to the bookshelf, pulled out a copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God, and pressed a hidden panel behind it. A low mechanical click. The wall shifted open, revealing the built-in safe. She hesitated only a moment before punching in the code. Inside, protected in mylar and envelopes, lay the legacy of Edward Williams. Contracts, letters, private agreements, originals signed and sealed. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the thick blue folder marked Whitmore. She opened it. There it was, the original investment agreement, her father's early funding of Jason's empire, the shares, the clauses, the stipulations, and most importantly, the line that Jason thought she'd forgotten. All assets secured through this investment shall require joint spousal consent for legal leverage or transactional reassignment. Jason had built his empire on her father's name. He'd leveraged that capital, that reputation. And now he was trying to push her out without remembering she was still a keyholder. Maya exhaled slowly. She wasn't crying. She wasn't raging. Her heart didn't race. She felt clear. She sat down at her father's desk and opened her laptop. She had work to do. Rain fell in gentle threads across the window pane, tracing rivulets down the glass, as if the house itself was weeping in silence. Maya sat at her father's old desk, the dim lamp casting a warm circle of light on the documents spread before her. The rest of the study remained cloaked in shadow, untouched since the funeral. She could still smell the faint hint of cedar, old cigars, and the dust of legal books that lined the shelves like quiet soldiers of history. Her fingers hovered above the paper. The contract in her hands was not merely ink and signature. It was a line drawn through time, through memory, through loyalty. Her father, Edward Williams, had trusted Jason. That was the most painful part. He had welcomed him into their home, mentored him, even vouched for him before major investors when Jason was just another ambitious real estate agent with polished shoes and a desperate gleam in his eyes. Jason's first $15 million came not from the bank but from Edward, from her family. And now that man had laughed as another woman humiliated his daughter in front of half of Manhattan. Maya closed the folder carefully, as if it were made of glass. Then she reached for her phone and unlocked it. No social media, no messages from Jason, not even a fake apology. He wasn't sorry. He had watched it happen. He had let it happen. She opened her contacts and scrolled until she found the name, Henry Grant, Esquire. Her thumb paused over it. Henry had been her father's closest legal advisor, a quiet man with a long memory and a sharper mind. He had retired 2 years ago, moved to a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights where he tended to his books more than people. But he had told her once, at the funeral, "If you ever need truth, not comfort, call me." She called. The phone rang once, twice, then a gravelly voice picked up. "Maya, I need to see you," she said, her voice steady but low. "It's about Jason and my father's investment." There was a pause on the line. Then, "Tomorrow, 11, bring everything." "Might it?" She hung up, leaned back in the chair, and let the silence wrap around her like a shroud. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner, each second a soft thud against the quiet rage building in her chest. They saw it all, she thought, and no one stopped her. No one stopped him. The next morning, Maya dressed with care, not in designer labels or gala wear, but in something far older, her father's favorite, a navy wool coat, fitted at the waist, with a brass button missing on the left cuff. She paired it with black trousers and low heels. No makeup, no jewelry. She braided her hair back in a simple twist and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She was waking up. She took the train into Brooklyn, sitting quietly as the city passed her by. People bustled around her with coffee cups and earbuds, oblivious to the storm she carried inside her. Henry Grant's brownstone was 3 stories of brick and quiet elegance, nestled between 2 blooming magnolia trees. He opened the door himself, wearing a cardigan and spectacles, looking like time hadn't dared touch him. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "You look like your father when he was about to go to war." "I feel like him," she replied. They sat in his study, a space that smelled of pipe tobacco and worn leather. Books lined the walls, law journals mixed with civil rights history and poetry. Maya laid the contract down on the desk. Henry adjusted his glasses and began to read. He said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, "He thought you wouldn't remember this clause." "He was right," Maya said. "I didn't. Not until I saw my name in the original signature block. Not until I saw the date 7 years ago. Almost to the day." Henry tapped a finger on the page. "This clause gives you joint control over any asset tied to the original investment. That includes the Midtown high-rises, the tech park in Austin, and the Dubai deal," Maya finished. Henry leaned back. "You still have signing power. If he used your stake without consent, he's exposed. Fraud. Breach of contract. Possibly federal charges. If he leveraged falsified assets in international dealings." Maya nodded. "That's why I'm here." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Do you want to sue him?" "I want to stop the deal. Quietly. Without scandal if possible. I don't want revenge, Henry. I want correction." He looked at her for a long time. "Your father once told me you were too gentle for law. I disagreed. I thought you'd be the storm after his reign." She smiled faintly. "Not a storm. Just balance." Henry stood and moved to a file cabinet, pulling out a dusty envelope marked with her father's initials. Inside was a second agreement, an addendum Edward had drafted but never filed. It granted Maya complete proxy rights over all investment leverage in the event of marital breach. "It was never notarized," Henry said. "But it could be. If you want it to be." Maya stared at the page. Her fingers brushed the edges. Outside, a soft breeze rustled the magnolia leaves. She looked up. "Let's begin." "No." As they reviewed signatures and prepared documents, Maya felt something shifting inside her, not anger, but alignment. The kind of calm that comes before a move so precise it changes the entire game. By afternoon, she left Henry's house with a folder under her arm and a plan in her head. Do you support Maya teaching her husband a lesson? If you do, give her a like. And don't forget to comment where you're watching this video from. Who knows, someone nearby might be watching it right along with you. She didn't call Jason. She didn't send a warning. She simply walked back into the city, silent and deliberate, like her father once had when facing a system built to erase him. But this time, it wasn't a system. It was a man who had forgotten she wasn't just a wife. She was a Williams, and the game wasn't over. The Williams house was quieter than any courtroom Maya had ever stood in. It had a kind of echo that came from long histories, good and bad, layered one atop the other. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment. Eyes shut. The folder Henry Grant had given her felt heavier than its weight. It was more than paper. It was a key. She set her bag down on the entry table and walked slowly into the study. The morning light angled through the tall windows, catching on the dust that floated like tiny drifting stars. This had been her father's sanctuary. As a child, she had sat cross-legged on the rug while he read briefs aloud to her, teaching her words like injunction and equitable relief before she could even spell them. The rug was still there, threadbare at the edges where his chair had rolled back and forth. She crossed to the desk. Her laptop sat where she had left it, open but asleep. She touched the trackpad, and the screen blinked to life documents, notes, scanned contracts. Her handwriting filled the digital pages. She stared at them for a long moment before reaching into the folder. Henry had labeled everything neatly: original contract, addendum, proxy authority, potential violations. Each tab was a map to Jason's empire, an empire built on her father's money and her name. Maya sat down and began to work. She opened each file, cross-referencing them against public filings. Her legal training came back to her like muscle memory statutes. Deadlines, terms of art. Jason had always mocked her for keeping her bar license active. "You'll never use it," he'd say, tossing the renewal notices aside. "We have lawyers for that." Now she was using it. Her phone buzzed once on the desk, a text from an unknown number. "We saw the video. Stay strong." She ignored it. Another buzz, this time a news alert. She swiped it open and saw a headline. Whitmore seen leaving gala. With model Sophia Green. Wife absent. Beneath it, a photo of Jason guiding Sophia into a waiting car, his hand resting on her back in the same spot he used to rest it on Maya. He looked unbothered, triumphant even, as if the wine on Maya's dress had been a christening rather than an assault. She shut the phone off again and turned back to the documents. One clause leapt out at her. Joint spousal consent, required for leveraged assets. It was plain. It was unambiguous. Jason had no legal right to use her stake in the Dubai deal without her signature. He had forged her consent. Every one of those contracts was a paper bomb waiting to explode. She leaned back in the chair, staring up at the ceiling. In her mind, she saw her father sitting across from Jason, at this very desk. Two men shaking hands, her father's eyes full of hope. He believed in him, she thought, and Jason betrayed that belief. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she let herself feel the weight of it, the public humiliation, the quiet betrayal, the long erosion of her dignity. It rose in her chest, like water, threatening to choke her. But then she remembered Henry's words. Play smart, not loud. When she opened her eyes again, they were steady. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a name she hadn't touched in years, Ethan Monroe. They had grown up together in Yonkers, two kids sneaking into the back rows of her father's lectures, whispering about justice like it was a superhero they might one day meet. Ethan had gone into tech instead of law, eventually becoming a data analyst inside one of Jason's subsidiaries. They had lost touch after her marriage. Jason hadn't liked Ethan, had called him that idealist kid who thinks rules matter. She hit call. It rang twice. Maya? His voice was deeper now, but still warm. Wow. I need your help, she said quietly. Jason is hiding fraudulent dealings inside his contracts. I have evidence, but I need someone on the inside to help me trace the money. You're still at Whitmore Analytics, aren't you? Silence, then a low exhale. I am, and I've seen things, numbers that don't add up, shell companies offshore, payments through charities that never existed. I thought about saying something, but you didn't, Maya finished. No one listens to an analyst, he said. And Jason Whitmore? He's untouchable. He's not, Maya said. Not anymore. Another pause. Then, tell me what to do. She felt her shoulders loosen for the first time in days. I'll send you documents tonight. Look for anything tied to the Dubai deal, transfers, hidden accounts, forged authorizations. I need a clear trail before I make a move. You're serious about this, he said. You're going to take him down. No, I'm going to stop him, she corrected. There's a difference. He chuckled softly. That sounds like the Maya I remember. Send me what you've got. She hung up and stared at the phone for a moment, then set it down beside the folder. The house was silent except for the faint creak of wood as it settled. She rose and walked to the window, looking out at the street. The magnolia tree her father had planted was blooming early, white petals trembling in the breeze. She pressed her palm to the glass. In the reflection, she barely recognized herself. Hair braided, no makeup, a simple navy coat. Not the woman from the gala, not Jason's accessory. Someone else, someone returning to her original shape. In the kitchen, she made tea the way her father used to, black, strong, with a single sugar cube. She stood at the counter sipping it slowly, thinking of all the times Jason had mocked her for holding on to old habits. He had called her tea grandmother stuff, while sipping his imported espresso. She smiled faintly now. Old habits had teeth. By nightfall, she had a plan drafted, a timeline of the Dubai deal, a list of every account Ethan would need to check, and a separate envelope for Henry with questions about potential injunctions. She sealed each packet carefully, labeling them by hand. Her pen scratched across the paper, steady, decisive. When she was done, she leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. The house hummed with quiet. She could almost hear her father's voice again. Never kneel to injustice. Rise in silence. Rise with law. Her phone buzzed once more. A message from Ethan. I'm in. Let's do this. She typed back only 2 words. Thank you. Upstairs, the old clock struck 9. Maya rose, closed the folders, and placed them back in the safe. As the panel slid shut, she felt the faintest sense of resolve settle in her bones. She turned off the lamp, leaving the study in shadow, and walked slowly up the stairs. The fight hadn't even begun yet, but she was ready. Jason Whitmore sat at the head of the long glass conference table in the penthouse boardroom of Whitmore Global Holdings, towering 39 floors above Midtown Manhattan. The windows offered a sweeping view of the skyline silver towers rising into a crisp afternoon sky, but Jason wasn't looking out. His eyes were locked on the tablet in front of him, tapping absently with one manicured finger, irritation flickering across his otherwise polished face. The room smelled of leather chairs and expensive cologne. The team was already seated: his CFO, 2 attorneys, a Dubai-based liaison, and an assistant adjusting the projector for the final pre-signing presentation. The $10 billion infrastructure deal with Al Karim Investments had been in the works for years, and today's meeting was supposed to be a celebration until the press started buzzing with questions about the gala. Jason had hoped the wine incident would fade quickly into gossip columns, but it was proving harder to bury. A clip had gone viral: Sophia's laughter, Maya's stillness, and Jason doing nothing. "Sir," the assistant whispered, sliding a folder to him, "your office line's been ringing. Something about a lawyer. Henry Grant?" Jason's face twitched. "Send it to voicemail. And get Sophia on the line. She hasn't returned my messages." The assistant nodded and hurried out. Jason turned to his CFO, Dennis Marks, a short, stocky man with a nervous way of licking his lips. "Let's move this along." Dennis cleared his throat. "Of course. We've confirmed all final approvals from the regulatory offices, and the last consent signature is logged in the system from your wife." Jason stiffened. Dennis didn't notice. "So everything is on track. We're set for digital execution tomorrow morning, New York time." Jason leaned forward. "Wait. What did you just say?" "The consent, Maya's. Her signature's already in the portal from 2 months ago, dated and notarized. We used that copy for the compliance file." Jason's jaw clenched. He'd authorized that signature through one of his assistants. He had told them Maya had signed off on it. No one had verified it. It had all been a quiet workaround. Now Henry Grant was calling? He opened his email and found a flagged message from Ethan Monroe, his data analytics lead. Subject: urgent, discrepancies in financial pathways. Jason opened it and read the first few lines. "Jason, several back-end transactions tied to the Dubai deal have triggered compliance red flags. I'm being asked about authorization trails involving spousal investment leverage. I need guidance on what to tell internal audit. Also, I've been contacted indirectly by an external party regarding potential legal review name mentioned. Maya Williams." Jason's finger hovered over the keyboard. Then he slammed the tablet shut. "Meeting's over," he snapped. "We'll reconvene when I say so." The team stared at him. "Now," he barked. They scrambled out of their seats, grabbing binders and laptops, murmuring as they left. The door closed with a soft thud. Jason stood and walked to the window, shoving both hands into his pockets. She's making a move. He had underestimated Maya. Again, he had assumed the gala humiliation would crush her, push her into retreat. He had counted on her silence, her old habit of keeping conflict behind closed doors. That had always been her style. Measured, elegant, tired of the noise, but maybe she wasn't tired anymore. Back at the Williams home, Maya stood by the dining table, organizing printouts of Ethan's latest data dump. Every transaction was time-stamped. Every falsified signature was cross-referenced. She had circled the most damning: a transfer of $78 million to a shell company in Cyprus, filed under a nonprofit registered in Jason's name and hers. Jason had used her name without her knowledge to launder international funds. She snapped a photo of the page and attached it to an encrypted message to Henry. "Violation of Joint Asset Clause, see timestamp. We need to notify Treasury oversight." She sent it and returned to the table. Her mind ticked through every next step. She couldn't move too fast. She needed to box Jason in legally, ethically, and publicly so that by the time the contract reached signing, he would be holding a pen with no paper left to sign. Ethan's messages buzzed in again. Found more internal ledger access shows Maya's ID tagged as sleeping equity partner, without her signature. Financial misrepresentation. Maya inhaled deeply, pressing a hand to her chest. The storm wasn't coming. It was here. She pulled out her father's fountain pen from the drawer, a gift to him from Maya when she passed the bar. She uncapped it, slid a fresh sheet of legal paper forward, and began drafting her formal cease and desist letter to Whitmore Global Holdings. She titled it, Notice of Unauthorized Asset Usage. Immediate termination requested. By the time the draft was finished, dusk had settled. Street lamps flickered on outside, casting long shadows across the room. Maya looked down at the letter, then across the table at the photo of her father on the bookshelf. You always said justice doesn't yell, she whispered. It walks in quietly and locks the door behind it. She reached for a fresh envelope and sealed the letter. Then, as if moved by muscle memory, she walked to the kitchen and turned on the old radio. The voice of a jazz singer floated softly through the room, smooth and defiant. Back at Whitmore Global, Jason stared at a new email from his Dubai partners. The subject line, Postponement requested. Partner verification required. He muttered under his breath, pacing. His phone buzzed. Sophia. Finally, he answered. Where the hell have you been? Her voice was cool. Watching the internet destroy you in real time. You do realize half the city saw you laugh at your wife's humiliation? Jason clenched his jaw. I don't need a lecture. You need a new crisis team, Sophia said, and maybe a conscience. If she's going after you legally, you're finished. Jason looked toward the door, as if expecting it to swing open with some miracle solution. But it didn't. He was alone, and the empire he built without her consent was starting to tremble. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and bore the embossed initials MW in subtle gold ink. It was the kind of letterhead Maya had once designed for her nonprofit legal aid clinic, a project Jason had encouraged, then quietly suffocated when it began drawing too much press away from his ventures. Now, it carried a different weight. It was addressed to Jason Whitmore, CEO, Whitmore Global Holdings, Hudson Tower, 39th floor, NYC. Inside, folded with precision, was a single-page legal notice. No threats, no dramatics, just cold, formal language that sliced through assumptions like a scalpel. Unauthorized use of spousal signature in leveraged asset contracts. Mr. Whitmore, this correspondence serves as formal notification that I, Maya Williams Whitmore, am exercising my rights as outlined in the foundational investment agreement co-signed by Edward Williams and yourself, dated the 7th of August 2016. My authorization was neither requested nor provided for the leveraging of joint investment assets in the Al Karim Dubai Infrastructure Agreement and related ventures. The signature on file was not executed by me. Per Clause 7, 2B of said agreement, I am issuing an immediate cease and desist on any further use of my name, identity, or associated assets. Pending full legal review. A copy of this letter has been forwarded to the Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, for due diligence review, as well as to my legal counsel, Mr. Henry Grant. This is not a declaration of war. This is a declaration of ownership. Respectfully, Maya Williams Whitmore. At precisely 9:12 a.m., the letter was delivered by a private courier to the Whitmore Global front desk. By 9:21, it was in Jason's hands. He didn't open it right away. He stared at the envelope for a long time, his thumb brushing the gold initials. Maya's elegance was unmistakable even in the act of dismantling him. He finally tore the seal and read. Once, then twice, and on the third time, he stood up so abruptly his chair wheeled backward into the glass partition behind him. Get Dennis in here, he barked into the intercom. Now, 2 minutes later, Dennis Marks appeared, breathless and sweating, holding a cup of coffee that sloshed onto the carpet. Jason slammed the letter onto the table. Did you verify the signature on the Dubai deal? Dennis's face paled. We used the digital signature on file. From 2 months ago. You said she'd approved it. She didn't, Jason growled. She just served me with a cease and desist. She's involving OFAC. Dennis stared at the letter, then at Jason. This could be serious. That kind of violation in an international contract. Lock et 10. It is serious, Jason snapped. It's exposure. It's jail time if they push it far enough. I need containment. Now. Jason's phone buzzed. A new text from Sophia. Just saw the letter. The internet's going to feast on this. Don't drag me into it. He ignored it. Back in Yonkers, Maya sat by the fireplace in the den of her father's house, sipping tea and listening to the quiet hum of the city morning outside. Her phone vibrated once Henry. She answered. Did he receive it? Confirmed. They're shaken, Henry said. I just got a call from a very nervous junior lawyer in his office. They want a meeting. Maya stirred her tea slowly. Good. Schedule it. Henry paused. You don't want to let it ride longer? He's exposed. You could push this public and take him down hard. That's not the point, she said. This isn't about vengeance. It's about truth. And about making sure this empire he built without consent never grows another inch. Henry exhaled into the line. Your father would be proud. May. She smiled softly, then ended the call. Just then, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Ethan Monroe on the porch, holding a flash drive and a stack of printed records. His brown eyes were focused, his energy sharp. I have everything, he said. Money trails, shell corporations. He's been using your ID to validate cross-continental transfers, and it's bigger than just Dubai. There's London. There's Sao Paulo. There's at least one eco-housing fund that doesn't even exist. No, Maya stepped aside. Come in. Let's make it count. They spread the papers across the dining table, creating a living map of Jason's web of deceit. Ethan pointed to several flagged transfers. These were all authorized using proxy IDs connected to your investment agreement. The moment you revoke it legally, this entire house of cards falls. Maya took a pen and circled 3 names, subsidiaries Jason had boasted about in speeches, ones he claimed were built from the ground up. They weren't, she murmured. They were built from a stolen foundation. Ethan looked at her. What's the next move? She looked at the clock. We go to the meeting. We give him the option to come clean, to walk away with whatever integrity he has left. And if he doesn't? Maya met his gaze, her voice even. Then we burn the whole thing down. Quietly, thoroughly, and legally. By noon, Jason's legal team had arranged for the meeting to be held in a private room at a Manhattan law office neutral ground. Henry and Maya arrived 15 minutes early. She wore a dark green blazer over a high-neck black blouse and simple gold earrings. She looked composed, powerful. Jason arrived exactly on time, flanked by 2 junior attorneys, eyes hard. They didn't shake hands. Maya placed a copy of the letter in front of him. You forged my consent. Jason's face twitched. It was an oversight. No, she said, her voice low but clear. It was a theft. Henry slid forward the evidence packets. We have proof of every transfer. We have witnesses. And we have contacts inside Treasury, who are already reviewing the complaint. Jason leaned back, crossing his arms. What do you want? Maya looked him straight in the eye. I want you to cancel the Dubai deal, publicly. I want a written statement admitting you used unauthorized investment leverage. And I want a signed exit agreement, relinquishing all claims to the Edward Williams Trust effective immediately. Jason laughed once, cold and sharp. You think I'll just give up $10 billion? You never had it, Maya said. You borrowed it. From my family. From me. Without asking. Silence filled the room like a verdict. Jason looked at her then, not as his wife, not as a woman scorned, but as the one person in the room who still had power he couldn't touch. And he realized too late. She was the Empire. The press release went out the next morning at 6:45 a.m. Whitmore Global Holdings has officially withdrawn from the Al Karim Dubai Infrastructure Agreement due to unforeseen contractual complications. CEO Jason Whitmore remains committed to transparency and growth in future endeavors. There were no quotes, no follow-up interviews, just a sterile, corporate statement that read like a damage control memo because it was. But the financial world noticed. The Dubai deal had been touted as Jason's legacy project, a historic collaboration between East and West. Now it was gone, and the silence left in its place roared louder than a scandal. Maya watched the news segment from her father's kitchen. a cup of coffee in hand, and her hair still in its morning wrap. The anchor was speculating. Analysts are unclear why Whitmore Global suddenly pulled out of a deal projected to generate over $10 billion in revenue over 10 years. Sources say internal legal conflicts may be at play. She turned off the TV. Henry called 30 minutes later. They blinked, he said. Jason signed everything. Full withdrawal from the deal. You now control the entire Williams stake in the company again. Maya didn't smile. That's not the end. No, Henry agreed. It's not. She had set out to stop the Dubai fraud. But in doing so, she'd peeled back the rotten wallpaper on the entire house. Jason hadn't just forged a signature, he'd built a brand on manipulation. Ethan's documents confirmed it. Environmental funds with no projects, affordable housing initiatives that existed only on paper, and offshore accounts feeding shell corporations. Most of it was legal enough to survive scrutiny, but only because no one had ever looked closely. Until now, by 10 a.m., Ethan met her again in Manhattan. This time in a quiet cafe across from the courthouse, a place with brick walls and wooden booths where no one paid attention to two people surrounded by folders. He slid a fresh flash drive across the table. I pulled everything tied to the Whitmore Equity Advancement Fund, he said, sipping coffee. It's fake. Not just mismanaged fictional. The IRS has it filed under an inactive 501(c)(3, and Jason's been funneling philanthropic donations through it to pad revenue reports. Dozens of them. Maya blinked slowly. He used charity to launder equity? Ethan nodded. And worst of all, there are community leaders, black and brown leaders who thought they were getting money from it. There are proposals, expectation letters. They were strung along. Maya clenched her jaw. Then we're not done. She reached into her bag and pulled out a list she had compiled the night before. A handful of journalists, a former prosecutor she'd gone to school with, 2 veteran whistleblower lawyers from a D.C. firm known for taking down corrupt nonprofits. She had written their names in longhand, in ink. Start sending this out, she said. Not anonymously. With my name on it. And the full documentation attached. Ethan hesitated. You sure? Once this hits, it won't be quiet anymore. I don't need quiet, Maya said. I need clean. He nodded, tucked the flash drive into his laptop bag, and stood. You're burning the whole forest. She looked up at him. No, she said. I'm clearing the land, so something better can grow. Jason Whitmore stared at the line of reporters camped outside Hudson Tower. His assistant tried to usher him toward a side elevator, but he waved him off. Jason adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his jacket, and walked directly through the front lobby. They shouted questions as soon as they saw him. Mr. Whitmore, is it true you forged your wife's signature? Why did you back out of the Dubai deal? Is it true your charitable fund is under investigation? Did Maya Williams expose you? Jason kept walking, jaw clenched, refusing to speak. But the cameras caught it all, the tension in his face, the way his eyes darted as if looking for a way out. Upstairs, his office was quiet, but the chaos buzzed through email, internal messages, board inquiries. 2 sponsors had already pulled out of upcoming developments. Investors were re-evaluating partnerships. One of his largest financial backers had demanded a meeting. And then there was the lawsuit, not from Maya, from a coalition of nonprofit groups who believed they had been defrauded. Maya had given them the paperwork. The whistleblower lawyers from D.C. had moved quickly, filing on behalf of over a dozen organizations. The case was titled, The People v. Whitmore Global Holdings. Jason dropped into his chair, hands trembling slightly. His phone rang. He didn't answer. It rang again. He finally picked up. It was Sophia. I'm out, she said bluntly. I just got dropped from 2 campaigns for being associated with you. I have a brand. Jason. I can't tie it to collapse. Jason tried to speak, but nothing came out. Sophia's voice turned cold. You didn't just humiliate your wife. You underestimated her. And now, she owns the narrative. Click. The line went dead. Jason sat there, surrounded by glass and silence. The reflection of the city flickering in the window behind him. Maya stood on the courthouse steps later that afternoon, facing a dozen microphones and twice as many reporters. She hadn't called a press conference. but they came anyway. She wore a charcoal gray coat and no jewelry. She didn't smile. She didn't perform. When asked if she planned to press criminal charges against Jason Whitmore, she answered plainly, "That's not my call. That's for the courts. What I did was hold someone accountable, not because he's my husband, but because he was wrong." "No." Another reporter asked, "Why now?" Maya paused, eyes calm and voice steady. "Because justice delayed is still justice if you don't look away." The microphones went silent for a moment. Then someone clapped, and then another. Soon, the crowd echoed with applause, not thunderous, but deliberate, measured, respectful. Like a curtain closing on a performance that had been honest, painful, and necessary. Maya turned and walked back inside the courthouse, her heels clicking firmly across the stone steps. Her father's name still hung on a bronze plaque inside. She touched it briefly as she passed, not stopping, just acknowledging. She was not here to celebrate. She was here to restore. Maya sat alone in her late father's study, wrapped in silence. The fire had burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the faded rug and shelves of worn law books. She held a photograph in her lap, her father in his judge's robes, beaming as he stood beside a younger Maya on the day she passed the bar. In the background, Jason was there too. Smiling, hand on her shoulder, pretending. She looked at his face in the photo, trying to find the moment when it all began to sour, when admiration turned to manipulation, when partnership gave way to possession. But the truth was, there was no single moment, only a slow erosion, 1,000 small dismissals, polished with charm. She slid the photo back into its frame and stood up. She had work to do. Across town, Jason was spiraling. His office was in shambles, not the furniture, but the structure behind it. Emails unanswered. Calls ignored. Legal memos unopened. His PR team had gone silent after Maya's courthouse statement. Even his most loyal assistant, Julia, had submitted her resignation in a crisp email. "With respect, I can no longer support your leadership. Maudizep." Jason's phone vibrated with a new message. "Board meeting scheduled. Emergency vote on CEO status October 14th, 3 p.m. He stared at it. His palms itched. The walls were closing in faster than he'd expected. He picked up the phone and dialed Henry Grant. It went to voicemail. "Henry, it's Jason. Look, I know you're probably feeling loyal to Maya right now, but I need to talk. Just talk. Call me back." He hung up, then opened his contacts and found another name, Maya. He hesitated. He hadn't called her since the night of the gala, since the wine, since his silence. He pressed the call button. It rang. Once. Twice. Then her voice cool, automatic. "You've reached Maya Williams. I'm not available at the moment. Please, leave a message." He listened to the beep and said nothing, then hung up. Back at the Williams house, Maya was meeting with 2 journalists in the same dining room, where she and Ethan had pieced together Jason's crimes. The reporters were sharp, an older woman named Clara and a younger man named Luis, both from the Atlantic Ledger, a publication known for long-form investigative work. Maya laid out the records without embellishment. "Here are the fake charitable disbursements. Here are the forged sign-offs. And here," she tapped a line on a spreadsheet, "is where Jason funneled investor funds through shell companies registered in states with no tax transparency laws." Luis whistled under his breath. Clara leaned forward. "And the wine incident, can we talk about that?" Maya paused. She took a slow breath. "Yes," she said, "but not because it was dramatic, because it was public, because women, especially women of color, get humiliated like that behind closed doors every day. I want that to be part of the story, too." Clara nodded. "It will be," Maya continued, "but this isn't about a marriage falling apart. This is about how silence allows empires to flourish, until someone speaks." They stayed for over 2 hours, asking questions with care and curiosity. When they left, Clara shook Maya's hand. "We won't sensationalize. We'll tell it true." Maya nodded. "That's all I ask." Later that evening, Jason sat in the dark of his penthouse. The skyline outside glittered with indifference. His drink whiskey, neat, sat untouched on the glass table beside him. He turned on the TV. switching mindlessly through channels, until the screen landed on a news segment. There she was, Maya, not crying, not attacking, just speaking. "We can't heal what we won't name," she said on screen. This was never about revenge. It's about accountability. For the record, I don't hate Jason. I don't wish him pain. I just finally understand that protecting someone's image doesn't justify the cost of erasing your own voice. Jason stared at the screen, his reflection faint in the black edges. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He just sat there, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down like wet concrete. Then something on the news crawl caught his eye. SEC requests financial documents from Whitmore Global Holdings following whistleblower allegations. His stomach flipped. It was worse than he thought. He shut off the TV. For the first time in years, Jason felt small. Not humbled, just irrelevant. Maya lit a single candle that night and placed it beside the photograph of her father. She poured herself a glass of red wine, this time gently, carefully, and carried it to the porch. The October air was cool, wrapping her shoulders like a memory. She sipped slowly. Behind her, the house stood still and grounded. Ahead of her, the wind rustled the trees. She didn't know exactly what would happen next, how far the investigation would go, or whether Jason would be prosecuted. She didn't need to know. What mattered was this. She had spoken, she had acted, and she was free. The wind carried a trace of rain as Maya stepped into the old community center in Yonkers. It still smelled like linoleum and lemon oil, like Thursday night bingo, and childhood laughter muffled by age. Her heels clicked across the tiled floor as she entered the auditorium. Same faded chairs, same scuffed stage, but packed full of faces now turned toward her. They had called this gathering themselves. Neighborhood leaders, elders, a few old friends. A retired pastor from the AME church sat in the front row, nodding as she walked by. Word had spread not just about the lawsuit, but about why she had done it. Not to destroy Jason Whitmore, but to reclaim the name Williams. Maya took the stage without notes. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady. "I know some of you haven't seen me since before I left Yonkers. Before I became Maya Whitmore, and I know many of you saw my face in the news this past week and wondered, why now?" She paused. A woman in the third row, her hair silver and braided tight, folded her arms and leaned forward. Maya continued, "The truth is, my name has been used for years to open doors I never entered. My trust, my family's legacy, my signature, they've been borrowed, bent, and in some cases, forged. And I stayed quiet, because I thought it was safer to be silent than to be difficult. I thought dignity meant endurance." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But dignity isn't silence," she said, her voice rising just a touch. "It's knowing when to speak, knowing when someone has crossed a line so far that silence becomes complicity." She stepped down from the stage and began to walk among the audience. "My father, Judge Edward Williams, taught me that our names are not just personal, they're public contracts. They stand for something. And when that name gets used to deceive others, to funnel money through fake charities, to build power on the backs of people who were promised help and got lies instead, then that's not just a personal betrayal. That's a community wound." People nodded now. Some leaned forward. One man whispered, "Come on, Maya." "So yes," she said, turning slowly. "I've filed the reports. I've turned over the documents. And I will not be backing down. Because this isn't about one woman being humiliated in a ballroom. It's about a pattern of how voices like mine are dimmed, erased, polished over to protect comfort." A quiet settled, deep and reverent. Then someone clapped, then another, then a rising wave of applause that filled the room, not explosive, but proud. A standing ovation of recognition. Afterward, Maya stayed. She hugged elders who remembered her as a skinny teen with a law book too big for her backpack. She shook hands with young women who whispered, "Thank you." One woman, in her 70s, placed both hands on Maya's shoulders and said, "Your father would have said, you're finally wearing the robe. Baby, just invisible." The next day, headlines changed tone. Maya Williams, the quiet power behind the fall of $1 billion mirage. Inside the empire built on her name, and the woman who took it back. Whitmore's charity scandal. How one voice turned the tide. In every photo, Maya stood alone. No flashy jewelry, no PR team behind her, just herself. Jason watched from his penthouse, eyes bloodshot, mouth dry. His lawyers had briefed him that morning. The SEC is requesting 7 years' worth of financials, and the nonprofit fraud claim is going to court. He had called half a dozen board members. Only one had taken his call, and even he had said, "You've become a liability. Jason, Maya's not the problem. You are." Jason slammed the phone down so hard it cracked the edge of the coffee table. He looked in the mirror. His suit still fit, his hair was styled, but something was gone. That shimmer of invincibility. The air he used to carry like armor. Gone. He thought about calling Maya again, but he already knew. She wasn't going to pick up, because now, she didn't need to. Later that evening, Maya returned to her father's study. She lit the same candle and placed a new photo beside the old one. In it, she stood at the courthouse steps, surrounded by community members, smiling, not in victory but in peace. She opened her journal and wrote slowly, "Justice is not vengeance. It is the quiet restoration of what should have never been taken." No. Then she closed the book and whispered, "I am no longer borrowed." The wind rustled outside again, but inside the house, all was still. Maya had stepped out of someone else's shadow, and into the full weight of her name. Jason Whitmore had always believed in one simple truth. When money spoke, the world listened. He had built his empire on charm and calculation, on making the right deals with the right people in the right rooms. But now, the rooms were quiet, the phones didn't ring, and the only sound in his penthouse was the hollow hum of isolation. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. Jason arrived at 2:45, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit and silver tie clip, as if he could dress away the shame. He rode the private elevator to the top floor of Hudson Tower, his tower, once, and stepped into the boardroom like a king returning to his court. But no one bowed. They barely looked up. The long table was full, 12 seats occupied by directors, shareholders, and legal advisors. A few of them nodded politely. Most didn't. At the head of the table, Chairman Robert Lynn, a seasoned venture capitalist with a reputation for cool detachment, cleared his throat. "Jason," he said, "please take a seat." Jason Saturday. "Let's get to it, shall we?" Lynn continued. "You've seen the reports, the media fallout, the charity investigation, the forged signature on the Dubai contract. You are no longer just a risk, you are a liability." Jason forced a thin smile. "Allegations can be managed." "Can they?" Lynn asked. "Because our share value dropped 18% this week. 2 strategic partners walked. And your ex-wife, who owns a not insignificant stake in this company, has aligned herself with federal investigators. You put your name on everything, Jason. Now it's all unraveling." Another board member, a woman in a burgundy suit, leaned forward. "You built your empire on the Williams name, and now that she's withdrawn it, what's left?" Jason's jaw tightened. "I'm still the CEO. For now," Lynn said calmly. "But this vote today changes that." A silence settled over the room. The motion was called. All in favor of removing Jason Whitmore as CEO of Whitmore Global Holdings, effective immediately, and transitioning interim leadership to COO Valerie Benton. One by one, hands rose. Jason looked around, disbelief creeping into his eyes. No one looked back. The vote passed, unanimously. Lynn turned to him. "You'll have 30 days to clear your office. Your access ends at midnight." Jason stood, rage tightening his throat. "You wouldn't have half of this without me." "Correct," Lynn said. "But we wouldn't be cleaning up this mess without you either." Jason left the room without another word. By the time the elevator doors closed, he was breathing hard. For the first time in his adult life, Jason Whitmore had been removed from power not by a competitor, not by a market crash, but by the woman he once assumed would stay silent forever. Maya learned about the vote an hour later. Henry called while she was walking through the Bronx Legal Aid Clinic, the very place her father used to visit on his lunch breaks, mentoring young public defenders. "He's out," Henry said. "Effective today." "No." Maya stopped near a bulletin board pinned with flyers, immigration workshops, renters' rights seminars, free flu shots. She pressed the phone to her ear, staring at the wall. "What did he say?" she asked. "Nothing," Henry replied. "Didn't argue, didn't threaten, Just walked out. Maya nodded to herself. Then it's done. Henry hesitated. Are you okay? Maya looked around the faded carpet, the buzzing fluorescent lights, the quiet work of justice happening on a budget. Yes, she said, because now, I can finally start building something real. Back in the penthouse, Jason stood alone in his walk-in closet, staring at rows of custom suits, all lined up like empty promises. He pulled out one, then another, dropping them onto the floor without care. His empire was gone. His name was poison. And the woman he once controlled had rewritten the story without asking for permission. He looked at himself in the mirror. No camera crews, no applause, no gala lights. Just a man, stripped. Jason opened the drawer of his nightstand and pulled out a bottle of scotch. He poured a glass, took a long sip, and finally let himself feel what he'd avoided for years. Not anger, not guilt, but irrelevance. The world was moving on. Without him, Maya's evening was quieter. She sat in the old community library, reading through grant proposals for a new legal education initiative, one she'd decided to fund using part of her reclaimed assets. She circled 3 applications from women-led nonprofits in Detroit, Atlanta, and Oakland. She smiled as she read. These women weren't just asking for money. They were asking to change the rules. A young intern knocked gently on the doorframe. Miss Williams, sorry to interrupt. There's a community organizer here from Newark. Says he drove 2 hours just to shake your hand. Maya set the papers aside. Send him in. She stood as the man entered, a tall, wiry figure in a worn jacket and cap. He looked nervous. I don't want to take too much of your time, he said. But you lit a path. People like me, people who've been trying to fight from the outside, we saw what you did. And it mattered. I just wanted to say thank you. Maya's eyes softened. You don't need to thank me, she said. You need to keep fighting. He nodded, and she extended her hand. This time, her name carried no borrowed weight, only earned weight, and the echo of her father's voice, still somewhere in the back of her mind. Don't let justice be a guest in your house. Make it family. She had, and it had come home to stay. The courthouse buzzed like a hive the morning Maya returned, not for her own case, but as a quiet observer. Word had gotten out that she'd be attending a public hearing regarding the fake nonprofit fund Jason had created under her name. The civil complaint, now expanded into a class action suit, had drawn the attention of watchdog groups, social justice organizations, and even state-level investigators. But Maya didn't sit in the front. She took a quiet seat in the back row of the gallery, wearing a dark trench coat and modest flats. No makeup, no entourage. Just herself and a small notepad tucked beneath her arm. The judge entered, gavel striking with authority. Court is now in session. Jason wasn't there. He didn't have to be for now. Only his lawyers stood to face the early procedural inquiries. But his absence spoke volumes. Once a man who chased every spotlight, he was now hiding from even the smallest bulbs. A young attorney named Janelle Cruz, representing the coalition of defrauded organizations, stood and began speaking. Her voice was sharp and steady as she laid out the timeline of transactions, the false promises of funding, the misuse of tax-exempt status. Maya listened, head bowed slightly, pencil moving slowly over the page. She wasn't taking notes on legal terms. She was writing down the names of every organization mentioned. She wanted to visit each one, not as a savior but as a witness, a peer. Beside her, a woman in her late 50s leaned over. That's you, isn't it? The woman from the news. Maya glanced over. Yes, I'm Maya. The woman smiled gently. You've got people rooting for you, you know. Not because of the money, because of the message. Maya nodded. Thank you. And that was all that needed to be said. Across the city, Jason sat on a park bench in Central Park, wearing a wool coat too fine for the cold day but offering little warmth. His phone buzzed. It was Sophia again. He didn't answer. He hadn't spoken to her since she publicly distanced herself in a statement on social media, calling their association a misjudgment during a complicated period of her life. The post had gone viral. He looked around the park. Dogs chasing balls, couples bundled in scarves, A kid on a scooter flying past with the kind of speed only youth and freedom knew. Jason's freedom was fading fast. He pulled out his phone and typed Maya's name into the browser. The search returned pages of articles. Maya Williams sets precedent for equity and legal accountability. Former judge's daughter forges new path for community advocacy. From wife to whistleblower, Maya Williams reshapes power narratives. There was a photo of her at a town hall meeting, shaking hands with local leaders in Detroit. Another showed her speaking at a fundraiser for low-income housing attorneys in Philadelphia, and then one more her sitting quietly in a Bronx courtroom, not testifying, just listening. Jason stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the photo. He remembered when she used to watch him from the gallery. Now the roles were reversed and she wasn't even aware. That, he realized, was true power. That evening, Maya returned to her father's house. Ethan was already there, seated at the kitchen island with a laptop open and a pot of gumbo simmering on the stove. He looked up. "You okay?" She nodded. "Better." He tilted his head. "You always say that, but today, you actually look it." She smiled. Ethan closed the laptop. "There's a development. One of Jason's old campaign donors just contacted a reporter and said they have proof that he laundered charitable donations into PACs for real estate tax cuts." Maya sighed. "They'll keep coming. This is what rot does. It spreads. But so does fire," Ethan said. "And you lit one." She looked out the window, where dusk was settling over the backyard. The trees were turning gold. It was October still, but the kind of autumn that hinted winter was near. She used to dread this season. But now, it felt different. Like closure, or maybe continuation. Ethan stirred the gumbo, then ladled some into bowls. They sat and ate in silence for a few moments, the kind of silence that feels earned. "Do you ever miss him?" Ethan asked suddenly. Maya looked down at her spoon. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not the man he is, but the version I thought he was. The man who held my hand in court the first time I defended a mother from eviction. The man who brought me coffee and told me I was the smartest person in every room." Ethan was quiet. Maya continued. "But then I remember, that man never let me shine too bright. He loved me most when I was useful, and least when I was visible." Ethan raised his glass. "To visibility." She clinked hers against his. "To freedom." That night, Maya lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She wasn't haunted, but she wasn't at rest either. Not yet. She reached for her notebook and wrote a single line. "Justice begins with seeing, and ends with choosing not to look away." Then she closed her eyes. Outside, the city pulsed with life. And somewhere, in boardrooms and courtrooms and forgotten communities, her name was no longer being used, but remembered. It started with a letter, a simple envelope. No return address. Slipped under the front door of Maya's brownstone just after sunrise. She found it while collecting the morning paper, white, thick paper, sealed with an old-fashioned wax stamp bearing a familiar insignia, the Whitmore family crest. She didn't open it right away. She set it aside, poured her coffee, fed the cat, opened her laptop, and read through a new round of nonprofit grant applicants. But the envelope sat there quiet, patient, a ghost dressed in linen. When she finally slid it open with a letter opener, the scent of Jason's cologne still clung faintly to the paper. The letter inside was handwritten, in his unmistakably precise script. "Maya, you don't owe me anything, least of all your time. But I need to say this, and I need to say it without cameras, without lawyers, without media filters. I built my name on yours. I told myself it was for us. That power earned was still power shared. But I see now I wasn't sharing. I was borrowing. You gave me more than access. You gave me dignity I hadn't earned. And when I lost control, I took from you instead of facing myself. You didn't ruin me. I did. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope, one day, when people ask you about me, you'll remember that I told the truth at least once. Even if it was too late." Jason, she read the letter 3 times. Not because it moved her, but because it didn't. She folded it, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it between 2 volumes of law journals, not forgotten, just filed. Then she picked up her phone and texted Ethan, "Need your help. I'm thinking about launching something bigger. Let's talk today." 2 days later, Maya stood in the middle of a vacant downtown warehouse in Newark, the sound of her heels echoing through the space. The building had once been a manufacturing site, then abandoned, then marked for demolition. Now, with her newly secured funding and partnerships, it would become something else entirely. The Williams Center for Justice Innovation, a hybrid space, part legal clinic, part policy lab, part storytelling hub. A place where systemic wrongs could be studied, not just argued. Where data met memory, where legal training included the art of listening. Ethan arrived carrying a tablet and 2 coffees. The contractor sent final quotes. Electrical, plumbing, insulation, pretty standard. We're under budget. She took her cup. Good. He glanced around. You sure you want it here? Newark's got politics. It's not Brooklyn. Maya looked at the cracked concrete, the graffiti-tagged pillars, the history and the bones of the space. That's exactly why here, she said. Too many solutions are built in glass towers. I want this built where stories were buried. He nodded. You're not starting a project. You're starting a reckoning. She smiled faintly. That's the plan. There. Meanwhile, Jason sat in a modest office in an anonymous WeWork space in Tribeca. No view. No assistance. Just a legal pad, a laptop, and a man learning how to be small. His phone buzzed with alerts from the SEC, the IRS, and a pending civil suit filed by the National Ethics Coalition. His personal wealth was under audit. Several of his remaining assets were frozen, and still, the world turned. He read articles about Maya's new initiative. She didn't mention him, not once, but every headline was a mirror. Justice built from ashes, Maya Williams, and the power of starting over. What happens when the silenced speak? From gala shame to national movement, the woman who rewrote the rules. Jason stared at the screen, then clicked it off. He opened a blank document and tried to write a statement of apology. Not for the media. For himself. He wrote one sentence. The most dangerous thing I ever did was believe I deserved more than the truth. No. Then he closed the laptop and sat in silence. Not defeated. Not redeemed. Just paused. That weekend, Maya hosted a quiet dinner with a few former legal aid colleagues. They ate grilled vegetables, passed cornbread, and shared stories of clients who beat the odds. No fanfare, no cameras. Just community. Near the end of the evening, an older black woman named Lorraine Gray Hair, sharp tongue, retired court clerk raised her glass and said, to Maya, for proving that justice doesn't always knock loud. Sometimes, she just waits for the right person to open the door. Maya smiled. Thank you, but justice doesn't belong to me. I just stopped pretending it was someone else's job. Laughter rippled around the table. Outside, the city shimmered under a velvet sky. And somewhere, far from the gala lights, far from forged signatures and corporate deceit, something better was being born. The old warehouse had changed. 6 months after that first walk-through, the Williams Center for Justice Innovation opened its doors to the public. Gone were the cracked floors and water-stained walls. In their place, polished concrete etched with quotations from civil rights leaders, warm wood paneling made from reclaimed buildings, and natural light that poured through enormous windows like truth pouring into forgotten places. But what struck most visitors wasn't the design. It was the silence. Not the kind that stifles, but the kind that invites. At the heart of the center sat the echo room, a round chamber lined with benches and acoustic panels. There were no microphones, no cameras, just a circle and a rule carved into the doorframe. Speak truth. Listen deep. No one here is invisible. No. That morning, Maya sat quietly in the echo room with a dozen guests, former tenants who had been illegally evicted, public school teachers, a retired sanitation worker whose pension had been stolen by a corrupt union boss. They weren't here for therapy. They were here to tell what happened. A woman in her 60s named Arlene spoke first. My daughter died waiting on a housing voucher. She was sleeping in our car when the asthma attack hit. The ambulance couldn't find her in time. Me. Silence followed. Not because people were shocked, but because they'd heard it before, and yet it still hurt. Another voice joined an older man, skin leathered by decades of sun and labor. I helped build 2 of Jason Whitmore's buildings. We got paid late. Barely got our hours logged. Then they fired us right before the union contract kicked in. I came home with nothing. My son started stealing to eat. Maya listened with her hands folded in her lap. This wasn't about collecting stories. It was about dismantling systems through memory. When the circle ended, Maya stood up and simply said, "Thank you. What you shared isn't forgotten, and it isn't over." People nodded. Some cried. A few hugged. And the room remembered. Meanwhile, Jason Whitmore stood across the river in a rented apartment in Jersey City, watching a live stream of the center's opening weekend. His hair had grayed around the temples. His once perfect suits were replaced by a modest sweater and jeans. No cameras followed him anymore. His name had been removed from every building, every board. He took notes. Not for business, not for revenge, for understanding. The irony wasn't lost on him that after years of silence from Maya, her voice was now shaping everything around him. And his, once ubiquitous, had vanished. He clicked through pages of the center's website, programs for youth civic engagement, policy partnerships with law schools, a podcast titled After the Silence, where Maya hosted weekly conversations with whistleblowers and reformers. He clicked play. Her voice filled the room, calm, controlled, measured. "Justice is like water," she said. "It doesn't always arrive with a roar. Sometimes it seeps through the cracks until everything that was false collapses under its weight." Jason closed the laptop and stared at the wall. He hadn't known justice could sound so quiet, so deliberate, so unafraid. At the end of the week, Maya returned to the Bronx for a private meeting with a group of city planners. They were working on a new ordinance designed to close the loopholes that allowed slumlords to hide behind shell companies exactly the kind Jason had once exploited. She read through the draft, nodded, then offered a single note. "Make the language accessible. If people can't understand their rights, they don't have them." The group nodded, scribbling revisions. Before she left, one of the younger planners asked, "Do you ever regret going public?" Maya paused. "I regret that I didn't do it sooner," she said, "but not that I did it." He smiled, inspired. That evening, Maya returned home and sat on the porch of her brownstone. Fall had returned. Leaves rustled along the sidewalk. The light from the porch lamp cast a soft amber glow across the wooden steps. Ethan arrived with a box of files, a grin on his face. "We just got an unsolicited donation from the Walker Foundation," he said. "Anonymous letter. Said they wanted to support women like you making truth loud again." Maya smiled. "That's good." Ethan sat beside her. "You're not tired?" She leaned her head back. "I am," she said, "but I'm also clear, and clarity is worth the fatigue." He nodded, pulling a blanket over both their knees as the wind picked up. "Did you ever think," he said quietly, "when you were that girl sitting in the gallery behind your dad, that one day the courtroom would become your stage?" She looked out into the night. "No," she said, "but now that I'm on it, I'm never giving it back." They sat together, listening to the hum of a city that no longer ignored her name. Because now, Maya Williams wasn't just a witness. She was a storm that didn't need thunder. The courthouse steps were quiet in the early morning. No cameras, no shouting, just the slow shuffle of public defenders carrying briefcases and worn files, just like her father used to. Maya stood alone at the top, hands tucked into the pockets of her navy coat, looking down at the city that had once tried to swallow her. Today was not about speeches. It was about testimony. The class action suit against Whitmore Global had finally reached its pre-trial hearing, and though Maya wasn't a plaintiff or a formal witness, the legal team had requested her presence not as spectacle, but as signal. Her very appearance whispered, "We are not afraid." Inside, the courtroom was fuller than usual. Dozens of ordinary citizens had come to sit in the gallery. Most of them had been affected by the fraudulent charity fund that bore her name. Some had traveled from Baltimore, others from rural Pennsylvania. They were mothers, teachers, veterans, everyday Americans who had once believed in the glossy brochures and celebrity galas that promised impact. Maya took a seat in the third row. She didn't need the front. The prosecuting attorney, Janelle Cruz, rose to speak. Her words were sharp as ever, but now, there was heat behind them, moral clarity. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not just a financial case. This is a pattern of systemic misrepresentation that preyed on trust, on hope, And no one is above the law, not even billionaires who hide their theft behind tax codes and photo ops. Jason was not in the room. He hadn't been seen publicly in over 3 months. His lawyers had filed extensions, delays, motions to dismiss, but none had worked. And now, Maya watched as his empire slowly transformed into evidence. Back in Jersey City, Jason sat in his apartment watching the live court stream. He'd stopped shaving. His voice, once so commanding, was raspy from disuse. He kept the blinds drawn now, not for privacy, but because daylight reminded him of who he used to be. He watched as Maya entered the frame, simple, still, powerful in her refusal to flinch. He looked at her and thought, this is what dignity looks like when it's no longer borrowed. His phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. He didn't expect mercy, and he no longer asked for redemption. But for the first time, he understood the cost of silence. After court, Maya didn't go home. She walked 10 blocks to a small cafe her father used to frequent. The owner, Miss Clara, recognized her immediately. "Well, if it isn't Judge Williams' girl," Clara said, handing her a hot coffee before she could ask. He used to sit right over there by the window and scribble on napkins like he was rewriting the Constitution. Maya smiled and sat at the same booth. The sunlight streamed in like memory. She pulled out her notebook, the one she used during the gala, during the investigation, during every moment she felt herself teetering, and wrote, "Justice is the slowest drumbeat, but it never stops, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it." Clara brought over a slice of warm cornbread. "On the house," she said, "for making noise where there used to be shame." Maya didn't cry, but her hands paused over the page. That night, back at the Williams Center, a young woman named Olivia approached Maya after a community talk on landlord abuses. She was maybe 25, quiet, with deep eyes that had seen more than her age should have allowed. "I don't know if I can do what you did," Olivia said. "I don't come from legacy. I don't have a law degree. I don't even know where to start." Maya placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You already started," she said. "You showed up. You're speaking. Power doesn't begin with a podium. It begins the moment you stop pretending you're powerless." Olivia blinked away tears. "But what if I lose everything?" Maya didn't flinch. "Then you'll still have your voice. And if you use it right, you'll make something louder than anything they can take from you." As October came to a close, the leaves turned brittle and red across the center's rooftop garden. Maya stood by herself one evening, watching the city exhale into dusk. She had learned to cherish these moments of stillness, not as rest, but as grounding. The world wasn't fixed. Jason's trial was still months away. But something fundamental had shifted, not just in the system but in herself. She reached for her phone and sent one text to Ethan. "Let's expand the program to DC and Atlanta. We're ready." She slipped the phone back into her coat and whispered into the night, "We're not done yet." "No, because the thing about echo rooms is, the truth doesn't just bounce back. It grows louder." Washington, D.C. was colder than usual for early November, the air crisp and cutting like a blade honed by tension. Maya stepped off the train at Union Station, her coat pressed close to her body, the hum of the city like a song she hadn't heard in years. This time, she wasn't here to observe. She was here to testify. Congress had called a hearing officially titled "Charitable Fraud and the Weaponization of Philanthropy." Unofficially, it was being dubbed the Whitmore Bill Hearings, and Maya Williams was listed as the first citizen witness. Ethan had tried to convince her to bring a team, PR support, legal prep, talking points. She declined all of it. "I've been studied, Ethan," she told him. "Analyzed, televised, patronized. This time, I'll be heard." She entered the Senate building alone. The hearing room was packed. News cameras lined the walls, their red lights blinking like mechanical eyes. Senators murmured in small clusters. Staffers darted between seats. Maya sat calmly, a folder in her lap. The chairwoman, Senator Laura Hastings of Oregon, gavelled the room to order. "We are here today to examine the misuse of nonprofit structures for personal gain, tax evasion, and influence laundering. Our first witness is Miss Maya Williams, former legal advisor, nonprofit co-founder, and whistleblower." Maya rose, took the oath, and adjusted the microphone. Her voice, when it came, was soft but crystalline. My name is Maya Williams. For years, I lent my name, my legal credentials, and my silence to organizations I believed were helping others. What I learned, too late, is that my trust was being used as cover. She paused. Funds meant for underserved communities were redirected to political lobbying, luxury events, and tax havens. Signatures were forged, laws were bent, and accountability was avoided by hiding behind words like charity and social impact. A murmur stirred the chamber. Maya continued, "I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to say, this system is broken on purpose. It is profitable to keep the public confused. It is easy to turn compassion into currency, and if we do not define stricter boundaries, real transparency, real penalties, we are not just enabling theft, we are endorsing it." One senator leaned forward. "Miss Williams, do you believe Mr. Whitmore's actions were unique?" Maya answered without hesitation. "No. I believe he was efficient. He used the cracks that already existed, and I believe others are doing the same." The room went quiet. Cameras clicked. Another senator asked, "Why come forward now?" Maya met his gaze. "Because I realized the cost of silence. And because justice delayed is still better than justice denied." She stepped down to a standing ovation, but the applause wasn't for spectacle. It was for courage long overdue. Later that night, Jason watched the hearing replay from the back corner of a hotel bar in Delaware. No one recognized him anymore. His face no longer graced magazine covers or stock market tickers. He sat nursing a flat bourbon, the amber light from the TV washing over his hands. He watched Maya speak, her composure, her conviction. He had never known that version of her. Or maybe he had and spent years suppressing it. He signaled the bartender and asked her to turn the volume up. A man a few stools over glanced at the screen and said, "That Maya Williams? She's something else. She used to be married to that real estate guy, right?" Jason didn't answer. The man chuckled. "He must be hiding under a rock these days. Probably knows he messed with the wrong woman." Jason just sipped his drink. Not denial. No defense. Only acknowledgement. Back in D.C., Maya sat alone in her hotel room. She had turned down the post-hearing cocktail invitations, the interviews, the political photo ops. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the Capitol glow against the night sky. A text from Ethan came in. "You shook the room. D.C. hasn't seen fire like that since Anita Hill." She smiled faintly and replied, "It wasn't fire, it was clarity." He responded with a single emoji. She laughed. Then her eyes settled on her notebook. She wrote, "When we mistake performance for power, we forget that the most dangerous people are the ones who can make change quietly." With a signature. A check. A vote. A silence. The wind rattled the window, and the city kept humming. But something had shifted. Not just laws, not just attention, but momentum. The next morning, headlines across the country told the same story. Maya Williams calls for federal reform and nonprofit oversight. Whistleblower's testimony triggers bipartisan support for new legislation. The woman who made Washington listen. Maya boarded the train home as a quiet hero, her suitcase light, her shoulders straighter. She wasn't chasing justice anymore. She was leading it. The train ride back to New York was unusually silent. No calls, no texts, just Maya, seated by the window, her reflection drifting across the glass like a past life watching from the other side. She didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly, but she felt solid. Present. Grounded in a way she hadn't since before the gala, the night her life broke into pieces and began reshaping into something unplanned, yet far more honest. As the train curved along the Hudson, her phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. Just 2 words. I watched. No. She stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't need to ask who sent it. Jason had always known how to say little and expect much. She didn't reply. Some silences needed to stay that way. Back at the Williams Center, the staff was preparing for an event that would be both intimate and historic. The unveiling of a new memorial installation in the Echo Room, a wall of names etched in steel, honoring the victims of philanthropic fraud, silent exploitation, and misused trust. These weren't just names from Jason's shadow. They were drawn from every corner of the country. Families who had believed in hollow grants, activists blackballed by corporate donors, communities promised funding that never arrived. As Maya walked the perimeter of the room, watching artists mount the final panels, a volunteer named Misha approached her, eyes wide. "Miss Williams, there's someone here to see you. No appointment," he says. He used to work for Whitmore Global. Nah. Maya's heart didn't race. Not anymore. Where is he? In the garden. Says he doesn't want to come inside. She nodded and made her way out to the rooftop terrace, where the last orange leaves clung stubbornly to the trees. There, standing by the edge of the railing, was a man in a charcoal peacoat, clean-shaven, weathered. Jason. He didn't turn as she approached. "Maya," he said quietly. She stopped a few paces behind him. "You don't belong here." "I know." She folded her arms. "Then why are you here?" He turned slowly. His eyes were tired, but clear. There was no smugness, no smirk. Just a man stripped of every mask. "I needed to see it," he said, nodding toward the center behind her. "All of it, with my own eyes. You've had 6 months. I wasn't ready to face what I ruined." She didn't flinch. "You didn't ruin me, Jason. You tried to bend me into something smaller. That's not the same." He let the words settle. "I believed that if I gave enough, donated enough, posed for enough photos, I could be seen as good, even if I never was good." She said nothing. "I saw your testimony," he continued. "And for the first time, I wasn't angry. I was relieved that someone finally said it." Maya took a slow breath. "And what now? You think showing up here makes it better?" "No," he said. "I think it reminds me that it's not about me anymore." That surprised her. Jason looked around at the city, the skyline lit in gold and slate. "There are some buildings going up in Brooklyn. Low-income housing. Funded by the last foundation that hasn't cut ties with me. I signed over my shares." Quietly. Maya raised an eyebrow. "You're trying to fix it?" He shook his head. "No. Just trying to stop adding to the damage." For the first time, she believed him. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't ask for. She stepped closer. "Don't confuse silence with peace, Jason. Some things you'll carry forever. That's your work now." He nodded. "I know." Then he turned to leave, pausing only once. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "you built something I never could. Not in 100 years. Maya watched him disappear down the stairwell, swallowed into the evening. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, the city wind curling around her coat, and felt a single word settle inside her chest like a feather landing on stone. Closure. Later that night, the memorial wall was unveiled. Dozens gathered in silence, candles flickering in low glass jars. A choir hummed a soft, spiritual, no lyrics, just breath and longing. Maya stood at the edge of the crowd, watching strangers trace names with their fingers, tears welling in eyes that had seen too much for too long. Ethan stepped beside her. "You okay?" She nodded. "This matters." He looked at her. "You ever think of running for office?" She laughed quietly. "I'm already too honest." He grinned. "Exactly." They stood together as the song swelled, the names shimmering in gold and silver. These weren't just victims. They were witnesses, proof that the game had been played, and that someone, finally, had blown the whistle. The snow came early that year. A quiet dusting blanketed the rooftops of Brooklyn and softened the edges of the city that never truly rested. At the Williams Center, heat radiated from the vents, and warm cider simmered in the community kitchen, welcoming guests who had come not for headlines but for healing. Maya stood in her office by the window, watching flakes swirl under the amber glow of the street lamps. Her desk was stacked with letters, hundreds of them. Not bills, not demands. Letters from everyday people. From Kansas, from Mississippi, from tiny towns in Arizona she'd never even heard of. They all said the same thing in different ways. "Thank you for saying it out loud. I thought I was the only one. You made me believe again." She picked up one from a retired nurse in Ohio who had donated her pension to a charity front that never delivered. The woman ended her letter with, "They took my money, but you gave me my dignity back." Maya pressed the envelope to her heart and closed her eyes. This, This was the real victory. Not courtrooms, not cameras, but restored belief. Across town, in a modest federal courtroom downtown, Jason Whitmore sat quietly at the defendant's table. The criminal trial had begun. The room was stark. No chandeliers, no theatrics. Just a judge, a jury, and the dull hum of justice in motion. Jason didn't wear a power suit. He didn't smile. He answered questions with clarity, not charm. When asked how he pleaded to multiple counts of wire fraud, falsifying non-profit disclosures, and conspiracy to defraud the government, he stood, guilty. Gasps rustled through the room. His attorney had advised against it, but Jason had insisted, because for once, he didn't want to twist the narrative. He wanted it laid bare. The judge nodded and scheduled sentencing. The trial wouldn't be prolonged. As Jason was led from the room, a reporter shouted, "Why now, Mr. Whitmore? Why plead guilty when you could have fought it?" Jason turned, met her eyes. "Because the truth isn't mine to rewrite anymore." Then he disappeared behind the heavy doors. The next morning, Maya read the news while sipping tea on her front porch. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but release. She forwarded the headline to Ethan, "Whitmore pleads guilty in landmark nonprofit fraud case." He replied instantly, "It's done." But she knew better. It was not done. It was only a chapter closing, and another beginning. That weekend, the Williams Center hosted a gathering for young community organizers. It wasn't glamorous folding chairs, thermoses of coffee, breakout groups scribbling on whiteboards, but it buzzed with energy. One young woman from Memphis stood during a session and asked, "Miss Williams, what do we do when people say, 'You're too angry, too radical, too loud'?" Maya smiled and walked to the front of the room. "You remind them," she said, "that anger isn't noise, it's direction. That radical isn't reckless, it's rooted. And loud? Loud is how the unheard finally enter the room." Applause erupted. Afterward, the woman hugged her. "I want to do what you did," she whispered. Maya whispered back, "Then do better. Go further. That's how we win." That evening, Maya walked the halls of the center long after everyone had gone. The echo of laughter still lingered in the air. She stepped into the echo room, now empty, and sat at the edge of the circle. From her coat, she pulled a folded paper, the letter Jason had sent months ago. She read it again, for the last time. Then, without anger, she dropped it into the nearby fire-safe bin reserved for confidential disposal. She watched it curl into ash. The past, finally reduced to smoke. Outside, the city breathed, and inside, Maya whispered the words she had waited her whole life to believe. "I survived you, and I did more than survive, I rebuilt." Not louder, not harder, but truer. Spring crept in like a gentle whisper, brushing away the frost that had settled deep into the bones of the city. The Williams Center bloomed literally and metaphorically. Planters on the rooftop garden were full again, filled with marigolds, violets, and tulips planted by volunteers and local schoolchildren. The building hummed with life. Footsteps. Laughter. Purpose. Maya stood in the atrium, holding a small framed photograph. It had arrived in the mail, anonymously, with a short note scrawled on the back. She would have been proud. Keep going. The photo showed her father, Judge Harold Williams, on the courthouse steps, hand on her 6-year-old shoulder, pointing to the building behind them. She remembered the moment. He was telling her that justice wasn't the building. It was the people who walked into it every day and didn't give up. She hung the photo in the echo room, just above the memorial wall. Now, when people entered to speak their truth, the judge watched silently from above, present without permission, witnessing without interruption. The sentencing came a week later. Jason Whitmore stood in the same federal courtroom, thinner now, paler. The arrogance had melted from his features, replaced by a kind of hollow resignation. The judge reviewed the counts one by one: wire fraud, conspiracy, falsification of documents. The full weight of his empire, built on illusion, now crumbled into sentencing memos and impact statements. Jason didn't speak. Not during victim testimony. Not during the reading of the sentence. 11 years. With eligibility for parole after 8. The courtroom was still as stone. Then, the judge paused and looked directly at Jason. "You stood on the backs of good people to build your kingdom, but what you built wasn't legacy, it was leverage. And today, you lose that leverage. Jason nodded, barely. As the bailiff escorted him from the courtroom, someone in the gallery whispered, "That's not justice, it's math." Maya, who had attended without fanfare and sat in the back row, turned her head just slightly. "It's a beginning," she said. Outside, journalists swarmed. But Maya didn't stop for interviews. She walked past the cameras, past the flashing bulbs, through the spring breeze and back into her waiting car. She'd been public long enough. The next chapter wasn't about her face, it was about her footprint. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, scrolling his phone. "They're calling it the largest nonprofit accountability ruling in 20 years. She nodded. "Good. Let them call it what they want." He looked over. "You okay?" "I'm tired," she admitted, "but not undone." "Man." Later that week, Maya stood at the podium in a community town hall in Atlanta, the third satellite of the Williams Center, now fully operational. This one sat in the heart of a once-neglected district, surrounded by generations of Southern black families who had lived through redlining, school closures, and broken promises. She addressed the crowd with a calm fire. "Justice doesn't end in a courtroom," she said. "It lives in zoning laws, in food access, in school board meetings, and in who gets to make decisions about who gets to live where. That's where the real battles are fought and often lost." A grandmother in the front row stood and said, "Child, you speak like someone who's lived it." Maya smiled. "I have, but more importantly, I listened to those who lived it long before me." Applause rose, not from admiration, but from recognition. She wasn't a savior. She was a servant of the story. Back in Brooklyn, the staff at the center threw a small gathering after hours. They lit candles, played jazz, and passed around index cards where everyone wrote down a name. A person they fought for. A loved one, a memory, a self. Maya wrote, "My mother, who never stopped believing in kindness, even when the world didn't return it." She folded the card and placed it into the copper bowl at the center of the room. A soft collective silence followed. Then someone began to hum, "A change is gonna come." The room filled with voices off-key, imperfect, but full of something better than harmony. Hope. That night, Maya sat on the rooftop garden, looking at the skyline. The lights glittered like promises. Beside her sat Olivia, the young woman from Memphis who had once asked, "What if I lose everything?" Now she was a staff lead. Olivia sipped her tea and asked, "Do you ever miss who you were before all this?" Maya looked out across the city. "No," she said, "because who I was before still thought power meant proximity, but now I know power is what you do when you don't need permission." Olivia smiled. "So, what comes next?" Maya leaned back. "We go back into the places they think we've forgotten, and we remind them we remember everything." The morning of the dedication ceremony came with golden sunlight and birdsong echoing across the Brooklyn rooftops. The Williams Center stood serene and powerful, draped in banners bearing the word "Truth" in bold serif font. No politicians, no celebrities, just people, dozens, then hundreds gathering for the unveiling of its final wing. The Legacy Room. It was a space Maya had envisioned quietly for years, sketched out in the margins of her notebooks, pieced together in her dreams between court dates and community meetings, a place not to mourn but to remember, to honor those who'd been erased by silence, greed, and systems designed to forget them. Inside, sunlight filtered through high stained glass windows featuring scenes of resistance, not saints, but citizens. A grandmother refusing to leave her home. A teacher turning her classroom into a shelter. A whistleblower standing alone in a boardroom. Beneath each panel, a quote carved into the stone. One read, "Truth doesn't shout. It endures." Another, "Silence protects the powerful. Stories protect the rest of us." Maya stood at the center of the room, surrounded by faces, some real, some sculpted, of those who'd risked everything to speak. She wore a simple navy dress and held no speech in her hand, because today was not about her voice. It was about making space for everyone else's. The ceremony began with a procession not of VIPs, but of ordinary people carrying objects of memory. A framed eviction notice, a donation receipt, a photograph of a loved one lost to medical neglect. They placed them gently into glass cases, where they'd remain not as artifacts of victimhood, but as evidence of survival. Ethan stepped to the microphone first. "This room was Maya's idea, but its power belongs to all of you. To every person who thought their pain was invisible, their story too small, this room says, you were never small. They just made you feel that way. He stepped aside. Maya moved forward. The room hushed. She began quietly. There are some wounds we carry that never fully close, but if we tell the truth about them, they can become something else, something bigger than pain. They become testimony. She let that sit. This room exists because truth without memory is just data, and justice without memory is decoration. People nodded. Some wept. Then Maya invited everyone to do what no institution had asked them to do before: speak. One by one, they rose. A former teacher from Newark told of losing her pension to a shell nonprofit. A nurse from Texas spoke of the foundation gala where she'd volunteered only to later find out the money raised never reached the clinic. A man from Detroit stood and said, "My dad scrubbed floors in a building Whitmore named after himself. He died thinking he was invisible. But he's on that wall now. And I'll bring my kids to see it." The room wasn't loud, but it was alive. Later, Maya walked the garden paths alone, letting the voices linger in her chest like a song without end. Jason's sentencing had made the news cycle, yes, but this moment would never trend, and it didn't need to. It had already been etched into the lives of every person who had passed through the doors. She paused by the plaque outside the legacy room. Below her father's name, a new quote had been added, one of hers, chosen by the board without telling her. Justice isn't loud. It's consistent. She smiled, not out of pride, but gratitude. That evening, the center emptied out. Volunteers locked up. The lights dimmed. And Maya remained in the echo room, the very first room that had ever been built. She sat in the center circle, alone. No cameras, no speeches, just her, and in a soft voice, barely louder than breath, she spoke not to anyone in particular, but to everyone she'd ever carried with her. I didn't win everything, but I didn't lose myself. She stood slowly, brushed off her coat, and turned to leave. As she opened the door, the wind outside caught the edge of her coat, carrying her voice into the hall like a final echo. Now, it's someone else's turn. No. And with that, Maya Williams, lawyer, witness, builder, survivor, stepped out into a city forever changed by her refusal to stay quiet.